Hello, Dr. Robert. Welcome you to the webinar today, and I will give introduction in Arabic and English.
Okay, great. Is this Maha?
Yes, Maha with you.
Good morning.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. صباح الخير. وصلنا سوى ساعات علينا الشهر الفضيل، شهر أجمل وأسعد. خط دفاع الشكر لكم وسهركم وبذلكم أقصى جهودكم من الغالي وأجيالنا، كما ندعو الله أن يشفي مرضانا ويمد صحتي محدث مدير مشاريع برنامج دبي أعان على صيامه وقيامه، وتقبل الله منا ومنكم صالح الأعمال. نرحب اليوم تحت عنوان ما الذي يجب على القادة أن يعرفوه للتغلب على الأزمات، ونستضيف من خلال الخبير الدولي الدكتور روبرت بوش. الله كريم. رمضان الإعلامية لحكومة جدات فيروس كوفيد-19 كبعض العادات الاجتماعية تعودنا عليها كما نوصيكم بضبط في المنزل والالتزام بالتباعد، وكذلك الالتزام بكافة التعليمات التي تصدرها حكومة الإمارات بهذا الخصوص. المزيد من عن بعد خلال شهرنا المبارك الحكم من خلال مركز الابتكار والمعرفة، والتي تصدر مجالات خلالها متحدثين الاستفادة علما أن مدتها تكون باللغة الإنجليزية. أستأذنكم الآن للتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية. On behalf of Dubai Government Excellence Team, we would like to wish you and your families a blessed holy month, Ramadan Mubarak. We are delighted to have you all here for joining today's webinar. It is one of knowledge management activities as part of Knowledge and Innovation Hub organized by Dubai Government Excellence Program. Stay tuned for our next live webinar during Ramadan. Today's session is on what the leader needs to know to overcome a severe crisis, delivered by Dr. Robert Bosch. Dr. Robert is an international expert with 27 years experience in investment projects with a total value exceeding $300 billion and conducted direct transactions in excess of 35 billion US dollars in various fields including defense, health, aviation, energy, tourism, and financial services implemented around the world in the United States, Europe, China, and GCC. He also played various roles in entrepreneurship, data analysis, and providing consultations and guidance to board of directors. He greatly contributed to the full range of investment activities of sovereign entities, including the European Commission and the Executive Office of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. Dr. Roberts holds a PhD in law from the University of Virginia, United States. Today's session shall include an introduction to the types of crises and disasters and the role of leaders in decision-making to confront and overcome them according to best practices. Before starting the session, I would like to give you some instructions on how to use the webinar tool. Everybody will be muted. On the right side, there is a toolbar where you can raise your questions during the presentation, preferably in English, in the questions box. And please refer your question to the slide number in the presentation. The GEP team will pick questions to be answered by the presenter at the end of the presentation. The duration of the session is only 1 hour. At the end of the webinar, you will receive an email that includes attendance certificate, survey, and link for recorded session. Presentation materials and handouts are available on webinar. Dr. Robert, a very good morning. We are very honored to have you here today. Now the floor is all yours. Please, Doctor.
Well, thank you, Maha, and for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, Dr. Zayad, for the initial invitation. Because we are in our homes and we are following the government's instruction, unfortunately, the floor is not mine, but the kitchen table is. I can see that we've got a nice bit of attendees here, so welcome to all of those that are trying to figure out how to continue with their professional development, despite the fact that there might be kiddies running around and spouses running around and all of that. So thank you as well. Some of you may be wondering if a webinar that is entitled what a leader should know to overcome a severe crisis actually applies to you. Because maybe you don't have a chief investment title, or you don't have an executive secretary, or lots of direct reports. But this is for you because leadership mindset is what we really are getting at here. And leadership mindset is the kind of mindset that whether it's old information or new information, you figure out how to support yourself and others to make a difference. And so if you are interested in being part of this leadership mindset journey with me, then let us continue. Because Maha has already given a nice introduction, let's see, I'm trying to flip the slide. The slide is not moving. Hold on, let me try again. Okay, there we are. Great. So I won't go over many of the things that she said about me. I will talk a little bit about myself personally. I'm a father. I have two little ones. Curtis is 9 and Livy is 7. And because they are in Spain at the moment, I'm actually here, despite the picture in the background. I'm actually in Abu Dhabi, near Yas Island. And so trying to maintain a work-life balance with my kids and my loved ones not being with me, it is a bit of a challenge for me. In fact, every day I do the daddy equivalent of a webinar with my two little ones. And I hope that they are, I hope that you guys are a better audience than they are. They're pretty tough on daddy sometimes. But let's get into the agenda. So I've broken up today's talk into 6 sections. The first is we want to make sure that we all know how to define a crisis. Defining a crisis is it has certain elements to it, it has certain types, and there are phases, and we're going to get into that as we go throughout the presentation. And then there are 5 primary challenges, it seems to me. Challenge 1 is about how do you manage disequilibrium in this case when you have such a severe crisis. And then you have very stereotypical work avoidance patterns that occur. And these are things that happen through crises all over the world. It's not relegated to culture or country. There's certain things that people tend to do no matter where they are in times of severe crisis. We're going to explore that a little bit. And then we have what is called the holding environment. And the holding environment is the social glue that is in our communities that helps us counteract some of these negative forces. The 4th challenge we will look at is some of the authority dynamics. In times of peace and in times of tranquility, you have a certain relationship. There's a certain relationship between authority, the government, and institutions and individuals. So we're going to explore that a little bit. because in times of crises, that dynamic shifts. And
Dr. Robert,
finally,
your
yes,
presentation is not showing.
none of it is showing?
Yeah, we just see the webcam.
Okay, let's see.
Yes, now
Can
perfect.
you see, is it better? Okay,
Yeah,
was it the beginning, or was it, did it just go out in the middle?
no, it's perfect.
Okay, great. So we were on the fourth challenge. I'm going to hide my control panel. When I hide my control panel, can you still see the screen?
Yes, I can see it now.
Very good. And so the fifth challenge is about trust. And when you're dealing with a collective challenge under severe circumstances, it's very difficult to keep and maintain that trust when there's so much uncertainty around us. So we're going to look at these 5 challenges as well. So, there we are. Okay. There are 3 elements that all severe crises have: high stakes, high uncertainty, and time compression. With regards to high stakes, the stakes can't be higher with COVID-19 because the direct stakes are death. And every day, through tickers on television and reminders, we're seeing infected cases and cases of death. We see it almost on a momentary by moment basis. So the stakes couldn't be higher. And even if you're not at risk of death, there are corollary stakes, right? There's the economic implications of this crisis. There are family strains that happen when you're working in a different kind of work environment with some of the stresses of dealing with other family members that are in the home around you. So you've got very high stakes. The second is the uncertainty. High uncertainty because, in fact, epidemiologists call it the novel coronavirus. As you know, there are many types of coronaviruses, but this one is novel because despite all the different other types, it is not clear what human beings' natural immunity is. And you have, of course, different experiments going on around the world. Sweden is testing the natural immunity of its citizens, but highly uncertain. And in highly uncertain periods, of course, the organizational structures that we work in, the way that we interact is going to be exposed. And we're not quite sure exactly how much. And then you have this issue of time compression. And this is probably the most challenging, most daunting element of all crises. There's clearly a race against the clock. And there's a direct link between the decisions that we make or the lack of decisions that we make. And it's not just at a government level, it's at an individual level, which is also very unique about this. So we can feel that time pressure, and how we respond and how we interact with authority figures and one another will have a direct impact on this. So in order to illustrate the significance of a virus that is growing exponentially versus linearly, I've posed a question. So let's assume in any given week, in a linear case, you have Monday, 4,000 cases. And then on Tuesday, you have 8,000 cases. So from Monday to Tuesday, the cases increase by 4,000, which means Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you go 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. Your poll should be open because now I've got a quiz for you. So at the end of a week, you'll have 28 cases if the growth was linear. So my question is, what happens if in this case, because in this case, the virus grows exponentially? So still again on Monday, you have 4,000, Tuesday, you have 8,000. What do you have on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday? What do you end up with at the end of that case, at the end of the week? You have about 30 seconds to answer the question. Everyone, you should see some questions there, which you can choose from. So choose what you think is the right answer. Okay. All right. So I'll give it another 5 seconds and then we'll close the poll. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So I think we've collected most of the responses. You're welcome to close the poll. And so we had 14% of our attendees out of, by the way, there are 500, right? So 14% of the attendees, which is, if my math is correct, 70 people think that at the end, that the answer is A, and at the end we'll have 60,000 cases. Not correct. 54% of the people believe that at the end of the week we'll have 256,000 cases. That is correct. And then we have 20%, 11% for the others. And so what this time compression does in a pandemic type of situation like this, in the linear case, at the end of 1 week, you have 28,000. At the end of 1 week, in the exponential case, you have almost 10 times more cases. And that pressure of time and the impact that something that is growing exponentially, that it has on your psyche, it has on our ability to respond, is very formidable, and it is something that is very, very rare about this particular crisis, although all crises, as I have, share the time compression element. So well done to our more mathematically inclined attendees. For you other guys, we're welcome to talk later so that I can sort of help you with some of your math troubles. Maybe, in fact, get one of your kids to help you as well. Okay, so next slide. We have, again, it's a little bit slow, I apologize for that. So then there are two types of crises, right? You have a sudden crisis and a smoldering crisis. Sudden crises come without warning. I have a picture there of 9/11. I was 4.5 blocks from 9/11 when that occurred. I watched the sky turn black and the streets go silent. It was a very, very eerie circumstance. It altered my perception of geopolitics and the world and the place of the United States in the world tremendously. I will never forget it. It actually did have a major impact on me, as it did with many others, not just Americans, right? So you have a certain sudden crisis. It's unanticipated. It escalates very quickly. And then you have a smoldering crisis. Now, the smoldering crisis, the triggering event is not a plane hitting a building. The triggering event grows slowly. Often there are rumors. There's misinformation about what's going on. People around the wine cooler or in the kitchen are murmuring, and you can sense something's in the air. And examples of that can be, are layoffs coming because we're not hitting our numbers, right? It can be, oh, there was a survey done and there was negative customer feedback. And so let's say 200 people were surveyed and 10%, 20 of them gave a negative view. Well, 90% said it was good, so let's not worry about the 10%. And then a few weeks later, another survey was done, and now it's at double that. But it's only 20%. The other 80% think it's great. And then guess what happens? It builds up, and because management says, oh, it's not so important, we'll figure it out, or they sort of push it under the rug, and it smolders and smolders, and then finally there are people protesting, there are people unhappy, you start losing customers, etc. So the smoldering crisis is one in which the evidence was there, it was just not acted upon in due time, in due course. Another way of thinking about the two types of crises is, and I'm sure you guys have heard of the Black Swan. The Black Swan came into our lexicon, our collective lexicon, around 9/11 in some cases, but actually much more so during the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And a Black Swan is, it's very unlikely, very, very low probability, but if it happens, it can have a major impact, right? And another thing about Black Swans is that in hindsight, everybody says, the government should have known, or the CEO should have known, or we should have known that this could have happened. So that's the Black Swan. And there's a new animal that has sort of popped up in the last decade called the gray rhino. Now, the gray rhino is a very interesting beast because it's very probable. Everyone believes that it's highly likely. The impact can be devastating on for your government department or for your family or for businesses, etc. But it's still neglected. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. And I'm very curious. And so we have another question for you, and I'd love to get your views on this again, because I'm also learning, right? Is with COVID-19, do you open the polls? Do you think it was a sudden crisis, a smoldering crisis, a black swan, or a gray rhino? And I'll give you about 30 seconds to collect the responses, and then we'll talk a little bit about the findings. Let's give it another 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2. Very good. I think let's close the poll. So let's look at the results. Okay, so it's a little bit more evenly distributed, this poll. We have 25% of the attendees saying that it's a smoldering crisis, that there were things that were missed, that should have been taken care of by our authorities or by businesses or healthcare professionals or whatever. In fact, there's been tons of videos on YouTube and whatnot with Bill Gates saying 10 years ago in a TED Talk and others saying, listen, we need to be worried about these viruses and we need to be worried about pandemics, et cetera. So I can see why 25% of people think that. 35% say it is sudden. In fact, there is an element of suddenness to it because, wow, in one day we hear about it, and a week later, it is closing down economies and countries and cities. That actually does seem quite certain. So I can see why 35% of the people would say sudden. 30% say it's a black swan, that it's highly unlikely, although it has a devastating impact. And now we look at it and say, well, we should have known, right? And then 11% say it's the gray rhino. Well, what do I think? I think it's a little bit of black swan and a little bit of gray rhino. And but it depends on who you are, because there are some people in our society, there are some people in our government, there are certain people whose job is to monitor black swan events. There are people in our ecosystems whose job is to monitor and keep us abreast of gray rhino events or smoldering events. And so the reason why there is probably so much dispersion with our attendees is because if it is your job to think about unlikely events and to monitor them, then it should not be a black swan to you, right? So if it's a black swan to the general public and to us, it makes sense because that's not our job to think about these sorts of things. So I think the answer really is, depending on your role in society and the position that you have, will depend on how do you see it, right? Okay, so those are sort of ways to think about crises in terms of type. Let's look at phases. So in phases, this is where the key challenge comes in. You can see here, there are 3 phases. There's the preparation phase, the emergency phase, and the adaptive phase. And the preparation phase is all the stuff that you expect companies and government organizations to do. They have their contingency plans, they have their business continuity plans, they have simulations, they have drills, running all these sort of what if scenarios. So all that stuff is there, and at the end of it, they're supposed to have a playbook, right? So you'll see the red A there, which is there's the triggering event, and it becomes almost binary. You have leaders and those who are supposed to think about these things, right? They go into problem-solving mode. But for many of us who don't have the plan and have not considered the issue, many of us go into high cortisol, very stressed, very chaotic, very fight or flight type of response, right? And what happens as we approach point B, which is the green dot, the leadership and those who are experts in trying to figure out how to manage through the emergency phase start to communicate with the general public in ways to bring that, we're talking about flattening the curve with regards to infective cases, while also bringing down that curve of anxiety and chaos. And so a lot more information starts to come out from the authorities and from government figures and from intelligence agencies and data and whatnot to help bring down that stress level. Now, the most interesting thing about this slide for me, and there are different, if we had much more time, we could really sort of dig into what all the colors mean and how the disequilibrium occurs over time. But I think the major takeaway I'd like you to get out of this key challenge is the challenge on regulating the stress in the system. Because what tons of studies show is that when there is a lot of stress that goes away pretty quickly, lessons aren't learned. Now, COVID-19 is a taskmaster. It is going on and has duration and it has legs. It's moving from country to country. And we get to see how one country responded before it gets to us. And then it goes to the next. It is truly a pandemic. And so in each of these environments, the government has to figure out how to regulate the stress so that we don't panic, but actually use the stress and the chaos to affect behavior, both at the organizational level, the individual level, the familial level. And that is really the tough challenge, because in that learning zone, we find that too little stress, people don't take it seriously. Nothing's going on, it's not gonna get to me, and they continue with their behavior, right? So how do you strike that balance so that people stay in the learning zone? And fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, this virus is going on for so long that it all gives us a chance effectively to start to adapt. And none of us by now can say we didn't know or we don't care, at least not with good reason. And this is just a slide that sort of reiterates that in a little bit more graphic way. You got your pressure cooker, and then you've got, mom and dad, or husband and wife, or the CEO and the executive secretary, however you want to sort of frame that, trying to figure out what the heck do we do now, right? And how much change and how many rules and what do we do so that we don't tolerate too much bad behavior, but we don't push things and make people change more quickly than they can, right? So that's that slide. Digging a little bit deeper into this notion of managing disequilibrium, there are 4 things that I think that you should focus on. Action, right? So we've already talked about that pressure because of time. So on the one hand, a lot of people say that crises are a catalyst for change, and I tend to believe that, at least when I think hard about it and when I talk to behavioral psychologists about it and I look at the data and do a little bit of research on it. I would love to believe that, but often it's not the case, right? More often, I believe than not, is that instead of the crisis being a catalyst for change, it ends up being a showcase and highlight for the deficiencies that we have in our companies, in our departments, in our governments, interagency issues. Times of pressure, of crises, tend to highlight the warts that we have, the issues that we have in our businesses. So if your company or your boss is slow and bureaucratic when things are relatively normal, he's probably slow and bureaucratic when things are heightened, right? So we really have to think about where we are culturally and how we respond to challenges generally, because you just don't have that luxury. So people go back to, as I put it here, it's primal. They go back to their sure program. It becomes as much an issue of, are we competent, as what is our character? We've all seen those movies where there's always the guy there that goes, oh, this is bad. Oh, what are we gonna do? The complainer. Well, if the guy's been complaining before, he really turns into a complainer now. So we really have to sort of be able to manage and determine who on the team or who in the organization is going to stop our ability to act. Then you have the issue around presence and availability. There's fear, there's uncertainty, it's a moving target. And so hourly communication, daily messages, weekly meetings, coming up with all kinds of ways of acting, interacting, communicating becomes much more heightened, right, as you would expect. The third one is very interesting, particularly with this pandemic, because often, as we know, the boss, the leader, I remember the famous quote from President Clinton, "I feel your pain," right? But he's the president. He's in the White House. He's got tons of money. He's got security and protection. Can he really feel the pain of a poor kid in the inner city, right? Maybe, maybe not, right? But in this case, because COVID-19 is not very discriminating, it can get leaders, it can get rulers, it can get workers, white collar, blue collar, Democrat, socialist. It really does not care. So now, when I was very heartened to see the leadership in the UAE showing that they were staying at home, doing their listening to webinars, doing their meetings remotely, et cetera. So it's not just that they are top down looking at those around them saying things are going to get better. They're living this experience too, as we all are. And empathy is very much a motivator to get people to know that we're all in this together. Finally, you have the confidence and faith. I'm confident, but it's not a false confidence, right? We are certain that we have a plan and we're working the plan, even though the situation might change and might be uncertain. That's the first part of the confidence bit, right? And then we want to empower others and say, we're acting responsibly. We want you to act responsibly too. We, in fact, have faith in you to do your part, right? Going to the next challenge. I'm going a little bit fast on this because there's quite a bit. There are 5 challenges I want to cover. We have maybe 15 minutes or so left, which is why we've also left some time at the end for questions. So by all means, if I'm not clear on something, I'm happy to sort of revisit it during the Q&A. So with the key challenge, the work avoidance patterns. As we sort of touched upon, there's this resistance to change. And I want to dig into that a little bit because all change is not the same. There's nuance to it. And if I told you won the lottery and it was going to make you a multi-gazillionaire, that's the kind of change we like. So it's not so much just the resistance to change, it is the resistance to pain and it is the resistance to loss, right? We generally don't like to go outside of our comfort zone, right? And we manifest that in 2 primary ways. One is the diversion of responsibility. It's not my problem, it's someone else's problem. You externalize the enemy. We heard, as you may have heard, some people in China saying, those stupid Americans, some Americans are saying, it's the fault of the Chinese. Some people are saying, it's big pharma, you get all these kind of conspiracy theories, et cetera. So at the end of the day, it's not taking personal responsibility, right? We may not be able to solve the whole thing, but what can we do, right? The second pathway, the second way that a work avoidance generally works is, I call it the diversion of attention. I'm not even paying attention to you, right? I'm too busy working on something else. Oh, what you're doing is not that important. I don't have the same priority as you. Yes, you work on that. I'm going to work on something over here. There might be different things that you should work on, but just make sure that when you're thinking about why your priority is different than the other ones, it's not about you feeling uncomfortable doing what is required of you, and that the different prioritization is part of the plan, and it's because you're actually still trying to solve a part of the problem, not that you're ignoring the problem because you don't like the challenge that comes with it, right? Okay, so now remote working creates a particularly interesting one, and there are two takeaways I'd like you to get out of this. The first is studies after studies that I've looked at demonstrate that working from home is less motivating. It's just tough. It's tougher to do. We have a certain work habits, we have certain life habits. It's tough to do. And it's even worse when you have no choice, right? It's one thing when the boss says, you know, I can count on Muhammad, I can count on Maha, I can count on Dr. Z to get stuff done. If they need to work from home, I know they're going to hit their targets. It's a privilege to work from home. But when you have no choice, it doesn't feel like a privilege anymore. It feels like a punishment. And so there are three negative motivators that we've identified, and then there are three positive motivators that can sort of help increase work performance. The negative motivators, as we already talked about, is if you're at home and you're worried about, well, will you have a job when you go back? Is my salary going to be cut? I'm at home, but I'm making 20% less. You've got the emotional pressures of trying to, you know, you never set your home up to have a proper study office. As I said, I am I've made a little studio here in my home to make it much more of a work environment. Thank goodness that I can do that, but everyone can't. And if you've got two working people or more working people, then, you know, how many study offices, home offices can you have? And then you have this notion of inertia. Things at some point start to feel like they're so overwhelming. You say, well, why do I bother? And this is where you've got to really sort of maintain social distance in the refrigerator, right? This is when you still set your alarm clock and you still go about your day in a responsible way. Resist that inertia. The three positive motivators are play, purpose, and potential. And the play part is interesting because sometimes we underestimate the joy of problem solving with colleagues. And so you're in the office, you just take it for granted. Oh, I got a question. Let me go ask Sarah. Let me go ask Muhammad. Let me go ask Ahmed. And then you talk about it, and he comes to your office, and it's much more fluid. And there's a reason why we go to work, right? And in that problem-solving experience, it's more challenging when you've got to set up the webinar or you're on the phone and all of that. So you've got to try to figure out a way to get back into that more playful mode and getting to a problem-solving mode, even if you're at home. Purpose. The purpose here is very clear because the outcomes are so stark. So what you want to do is to make sure that the work that you're doing, you may have to over communicate it. Normally someone sees you in the office, the boss walks by, he checks and says, oh, everyone's at their desk or whatever. All right, he goes into his office. Now he's thinking, well, you know, are they really working or are they burping the baby right now, right? Whatever it is, right? So it's okay to over communicate. Hey, boss, this is what's going on, just checking in, I'll have something to you. Or people, you know, look in on people that are reporting to you. Just want to make sure everything is okay. I know things are challenging. How's it going? Yes, we thought we'd get that done in a couple of days, but you know, it's just, you know, making sure that you're a little bit more understanding, but you still make yourself visible. And it's not this false kind of bragging and I'm trying to get the credit. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not the purpose that we're talking about. What we're really talking about is the legitimate work that you're doing. It becomes more challenging for others to know that you're doing it, and it's okay to share what you're doing and communicate in a way that lets them know that you're hitting your marks, because we're just not sure that face-to-face doesn't exist. Finally, potential. Most of us have personal development plans for the year. We have them with our jobs, we have them professionally, as well as with ourselves. Don't give up on those. So I'll tell you one of mine. Mine is I've been really trying to work on my German. My kids are, my wife is from Germany. My kids speak German. I speak baby German. And so one of the things I've been doing every day for 30 minutes since the stay at home, I've been practicing my German, just 30 minutes, not a full day, but just something so that when I come out of this, when I do Daddy webinar again, I'm going to say some cool things in German to my kids, because that's part of my personal development. It also might help me professionally, but make sure that some of those developmental goals that you had with your boss or that you had with your staff, still figure out a way to keep that going, because that's going to help them, whether they're particularly if they're remote working, that someone is still thinking about their career development. Key challenge 3, we won't spend a little bit of time on this, but I just wanted to highlight a couple things, particularly with the pictures. There is some crazy stuff happening all over the world. In the US, I don't know how much you follow what's going on there. You've got protests and you've got our people, ministers saying we should be able to have people come to our church. You got all kinds of drama happening with 300 plus million people, right? Highly independent in America, and then we're free, and we have all of these rights and privileges, etc., which I love. And in the cases of normal environment, which are great, but in times of severe crisis, you've got to step down, right? You've got to allow the authorities to manage your freedoms in a way that you may be uncomfortable with. And fortunately, you have in the UAE a different type of dynamic, thank goodness. And in part, and we'll talk about this when we get to trust, is because the goodwill that certain countries, including the UAE, have created over time. You don't have this so much distrust. You don't have to be so heavy-handed as many countries that I'm looking at and having conversations with. So thank goodness for that. Decisive action is being taken. Malls are being closed. Airports are being closed. Cinemas are being closed. In fact, one of the things I love, talking about communicating intermodal, when I get in my car, I turn on the radio, it says, stay at home. If you have a BMW, there's a message that comes across that says, I forget exactly what it says, but it's basically reminding you, what are you doing driving? Where are you going, right? So the government has been very clever, I think, in having action and then nudging the people to remember what this is all about. That's the way that, and there are many other kinds of things that we can do as bosses and leaders and family members to nudge those around us to remember what this is about and to stay focused on the problem. And the takeaway from this slide is your communication doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be clear and it has to respond to the changing situation. The key challenge 4 is there is tremendous pressure to treat adaptive problems like technical problems. We have built skyscrapers in this country in record time. Cities have come out of the desert, right, in record time. The technical competency that we have across so many industries all over the world, and particularly in the UAE, it is phenomenal what we can accomplish. And we know the time, we know the budget, we know the resources. It's clockwork, right? And that's wonderful. But this is not one of those cases, even if you've done good pre-planning. So I call this more like jazz, right? Where you've got a good jazz musician is listening, they're vibing, they're going with the flow of the bass player and the drummer and the singer. The singer changes it up today and everyone goes with the flow. There's so much more harmony and congruent interaction, right, in real time. And the best players, you can hear it in the audience, you can feel it as a citizen, you can feel it as an employee when there is synergy and synthesis happening with the main players. Now, but you see from the jagged line from A to B, right? It goes down and it goes up and it goes down and it goes down some more and then it goes up again, but you get there, right? And so as a leader, or even if you are with certain decisions, not in a leadership position, recognize that those that are trying to lead, there is no classical technical path, that it's going to be a little bit of him and haw because the environment is changing. But following that jazz path, you can still get to your objective, which is point B. So the takeaway at the bottom of the slide is you design a plan, you decisively act, knowing that you must be prepared to course correct in the middle of the plan. Improvisation becomes the new habit. You let people know that this is the best that we can do at the moment. We think this is the right answer. If things change, we will change it, and that's okay, right? Key challenge number 5 is trust. It's a very simple slide, it looks like, but it can be very deceiving because there's a lot here to take away from. The vertical bond is the authority bond. Authority is the government. It's security. It's defense. It's the military. It's making sure that we have clean water and we have safe parks. It's the taxes that we pay, the VAT. It's the tolls. All of the things that as government employees and government consultants and workers that we're responsible, those services of the government that need to be provided to citizens and residents and to tourists, right? So those create bonds. And then you have the horizontal bonds. I call it the social capital bonds. And these are the bonds where if you share a religion, maybe it's because we are all citizens of UAE, we're Emiratis. Maybe it's we love a certain sports team. Maybe it's because of my family connection, right? So you have all of these bonds. They may seem like soft bonds, but they're important. And that intersection in the middle is that social contract. And crises will amplify the challenges of getting that vertical authority rules space line bond connected properly with the social capital, much more principles and values based bond. So let's look at that social contract with a little bit more detail. So here, and this is my daddy webinar kind of training. So the way I would say this to my kids, and I hope you guys don't mind, I would say you got a big P and some baby P's. And the big P is the public. It's individual companies. It's businesses. It's by sector, by industry, et cetera. That's the P and all the little P's. And those P's entrust power to the big G and all the little G's. So maybe the big G in the middle is the federal government, and the little G's are the municipalities and the other emirates and all the other little departments that are part of big G. And in return, big G and little g provide services to big P and little p. Now, the interesting thing about this is that in times of severe crisis, P and all the little p's start to really depend on G more than ever. Because if G before is doing a good job, G is almost silent. Everything just works. We don't think anymore about, well, maybe some of us do, if the internet is going to work or if our water is going to be running. Big G and the little G's have done a very good job of that, particularly in developed countries and particularly here in the UAE, right? So G's power comes from its invisibility. Things just work, right? But in times of severe crisis, the demand goes up on the G, so the coordinating function of G to really work with all the little G's is heightened. At the same time where G and the little G's are making less money. In other words, if you're with big G or one of the little G's, you're expected to do more with less. P is at an advantage because, as you'll see, I didn't put, there's not a connection of those P's, because what happens, all the little P's start thinking about themselves. Well, I'm in the airline industry, or I'm in construction, or I'm in hospitality, or I have a small business. And so that coordinating function doesn't have to be there on the P side, but it must be there on the G side. And that social, and for G and the little G's to coordinate and do a good job, that this axis tilts more towards the authority vertical axis, because there's just more required of it, right? So traditionally, the trust, if you ask a lot of people, what is trust? Honesty comes up. And I think honesty clearly has a role when we're thinking about trust, of course. But I want to share a slightly different view. I don't know how orthodox this view is, but from a lot of thinking and communicating and experiences in different markets all over the world, I think in times of crises, honesty is important, but one, competency is probably more important. Now, and then values. And all the values don't necessarily have to be a value of honesty. Let me give you an example of what happens in the United States. So you have President Trump, man, I just went back 20 years, right? President Trump, people say, how can you trust the President of the United States? He's saying that the news is fake and that journalists are lying on him, and then the journalists and the Democrats are saying our Republican president is lying. There seems to be a whole big breakdown of trust. So I'm looking at both of these and I go, well, how can you trust the media if you don't think they're honest? And how can people follow Trump if they don't think he's honest? But guess what happens? Particularly in times of severe stress, honesty gets supplanted almost with a different kind of value. It is, do you have my back? So the people can follow our president of the United States, because they say, even if he fudges on this or that, guess what? We know that he has our interest at heart. So they overlook the little fibs or the exaggerations or the awkward communication style, et cetera, because they think that he shares their values. So when you're thinking about the issue of trust, particularly in times of stress, it's not about getting it perfectly right and was it exactly honest in what you said. In fact, governments don't have the latitude to communicate fully and with 100% honesty. First, we're not even quite sure what is the honest thing because it can move. So what you want is that you know the government's got your back. And as employees and stewards of the government, what's more important to me is not whether you get the message 100% correct, but I know that you are empathetic, that you're feeling my pain, that we share values about making sure that the UAE comes out of this stronger than ever, right? So let's leave it at that. Thank you, Mubarak Alaikum al-Shahar. And we have about 12 minutes to take some questions.
Thank you for the inspiring and interesting presentation, Dr. Robert. There are lots of takeaways and lessons learned. Now we have some questions for you from our audience. The first question from Hamida Azaruni. She's asking how the leaders will set the KPIs and other metrics to measure performance. Do they need to keep the same KPIs before the crisis, or they have to change it?
That's a great question. We have thought about, so let me open that question up a little bit and then narrow it down to the right kinds of metrics. In normal times, many of the metrics are about efficiency. It's about have you met particular goals and objectives, right? So for example, if you are in procurement, you're trying to get the items the cheapest price and most efficiently in your supply chain and bring them in. So efficiency becomes a metric, the cost-effective use of your time, cost-effective use of your resources, etc. In a time of crises, the metric is less about efficiency than it is about resiliency. And so I think it was Hamida, absolutely the metric needs to change. In fact, I would suggest that more metrics about your ability to handle disruption, your ability to be resilient in your organization is also is going to be a key metric going forward, because guess what? Something is always going to happen. So if your key objectives are just assuming the status quo, most of us know what those kind of objectives are. That's clear. But what happens when things sort of go off plan? I, as a leader, want to know if you can play jazz with me, not if you just follow the script. Now, depending on how senior you are, you may have more or less latitude than others. But at the end of the day, we need to have metrics that provide an incentive, that make it clear that we're also going to measure your ability to adapt. And there is a lot more that can be done how we measure adaptability and resiliency in times of crises and in general. One of which is your ability to interface with other departments, your ability to interface with different Emirates, right? Because this is a countrywide problem. Depending on how senior you are, your ability to interface with your neighbors in the GCC, et cetera. So this interconnectedness, this adaptability, this resilience is very much part of the new metrics that I hope we take as one of the lessons learned.
Thank you, Doctor. The second question from Ahmed Al-Zaabi, he wants to know your feedback on the statement that he typed. Saying, with regards to the quickness of taking a decision as comparing to Italy with China efforts, sometimes assumptions could be wrong, and several of theories, especially if the crisis happens for the first time, and no one did handle similar cases. So what is your feedback on that? And what is the best thing to do?
I didn't quite understand the question, but if I'm not sure I understood the question, so let me give it a stab. And if I don't quite answer the question, then please ask me again.
Yes, I will repeat the statement. He wants your feedback and what is the best thing to do. He's saying with regards to the quickness of taking a decision as comparing Italy with China efforts. Sometimes assumptions could be wrong and several of theories, especially if the crisis happens for the first time and no one did handle similar cases before.
Very good. I like that question, and it goes back to a couple of the slides, right, where we talked about this, let's see if I can find it here. So it'll illustrate it better because it's embedded in this one, right? So firstly, Italy is not China. China is not the UAE. The UAE is not the United States. It would be insensitive of us to assign a view about what leadership did in another country and their responsiveness, and if they had responded faster and all of that, and think that that is the benchmark for us. We have the benefit in the UAE of having watched how Wuhan responded to it. There are some good lessons to be learned there. There might be some additional kinds of lessons to be learned there, but this one size fit all, if we can build a skyscraper in New York, then we should be able to build a skyscraper in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi. These are not, most of this is not about a technical problem. Most of this is about the responsiveness of the people to follow the direction of the authorities and the lessons. Italians have a very different kind of culture, as you know, than what's here in the UAE, and as well as in the United States. So I think it would be wrong to say they should have been faster or they should have done it this way. The Swedes are taking a very different view on this, so we have to be careful. This is why how I gave the presentation, I talked about frameworks and challenges that we're all having. But these frameworks and challenges in operation have to be much more localized. So I will not opine in any meaningful way on what Italy failed to do and should it have done better. It's got a different corporate governance structure. It's got a different federal governance structures, etc. But what I will say, I believe that the people did the best that they could, and everyone that was at tension, we sit in the United States. So for example, the debate is going on every day in the news, and I listen to the news that's coming from the Republican side and the Democrat side. I'm trying to find the objectivity, but they're all sort of taking shots. Well, uneasy are the decisions that when you have to make those calls. So it's a long-winded answer. I think at the end of the day, do what you can, trust that your government is trying to do what it can, and looking over the fence over what someone else is doing and trying to measure yourself. Create your own standards, create your own measures, create your own metrics, and go from there.
Thank you, Doctor. There are lots of many interesting questions, but we will take this last question because we don't have time. The last question from Fadil Nabilsi.
Let's take two, and I will make let's take two, and then we'll make. I'll give you shorter answers. Go ahead.
Okay. In the time of crisis, how the leader can balance between the push of the society to take an immediate action while you need more time to take a more appropriate action?
Yeah, so, well, there are, let's, and this is not in the deck specifically, let's talk about different kinds of risks, right? So there is the operational risk of executing. We think we understand what needs to be done, but it takes time to execute. There's an operational challenge, right? So most people think, but not leaders, not true leaders, not those that have rolled up their sleeves and had to deliver, that once you have a plan, to go from plan to execution is like that. No, it's not. You've got tons of people, particularly something that is complex as this, that have to play a role and then have to figure out how they interact with others. So there is a lot of operational challenges that will affect your ability to be responsive, right? You can have a great plan executed poorly. It didn't matter if the plan was great. Right? And then you have, particularly a crisis like this that's hitting on so many dimensions of our lives and our livelihoods. You have the operational issues with regards to the healthcare bit. You have operational issues with regards to the financial impact. You know, what kind of responses do we have to protect the stock market, to protect different industries, and getting all those P's from different industries, et cetera, to move things, to address the problem and then move things forward. So this notion that despite the fact of the exponential challenge of this kind of crisis, that you can snap a finger and respond. The responses, if they're going, it is better to hopefully get the answer as right as you can based on the facts as they present themselves and take a beat than rush to judgment, because that rush to judgment can actually create a problem for later. I'm actually a little bit concerned about some of the things that you were doing in the United States to put out the fire. I'm wondering if you know, and President Trump sort of mentioned, is the cure worse than the disease? So this whole notion of pushing it, just don't worry about that pressure to think this is a technical problem with a technical solution. It's got to be more adaptive, and that's okay. Last question, please.
Okay, the last question from Naaman Al-Saleh. He's asking, in the spectrum of uncertainty, what tool can be useful, and can actuarial or foresight scenarios be useful to put matters in place?
Okay, so I'm going to do this in 1 minute, and any of these questions, you're welcome to reach out to me if you like. So here's the minute. Here we go. 3 risk buckets. There are risks that you can share with others. When there's a lot of uncertainty, you have to find people that have the same problem, that are going through the same experience, and see how you can share that risk with them. That's part of what insurance does, right? It would be difficult if the only person that had insurance for their home to burn down was me. The premiums would be nuts, right? So we collectively have insurance because that's a common problem. We don't know if our house is going to burn down. God willing, it doesn't. But insurance is a way to share the risk. That's one bucket. Another bucket is assumption of risk. Are we going to assume the risk ourselves, self-insure? Do we understand? Assuming the risk is different than not understanding the risk, and then I guess we're just going to fly by our coattails. So the second bucket is, what risk are we willing to assume? The third bucket is, what risk are we willing to sell, pay someone else to take for us? And starting from that framework, then you can start building down and coming up with the plan.
Thank you, Dr. Robert, once again. And it's a pleasure to have you all here today. We reached to the end of the session. Ladies and gentlemen, this virus knows no barriers. It does not discriminate. Please protect yourself and your loved ones by following the guidelines established by authorities for your protection. This Ramadan, stay safe, stay home for your health and your families and beloved one. Thank you all and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.